Hi, everyone. My name is David Chesnut. I'm a senior technical writer on the Office Platform team. Today, I'm going to do a demo of how you can deploy an Office add-in that uses SSO to Azure. This is a question that's come up a few times, like on the GitHub issues. I've seen folks struggling with it. And so last month in December, I decided to write an article to tackle this subject that hopefully is going to help people. So I'm just going to do a demo. So let me share my desktop here. So this is the article that's put together on how you can deploy to a Microsoft Azure App Service. This is still in review right now. So if you go looking for this, it's not published. I'm hoping to get this published by the end of this week. Fun thing that happened, all the steps in this article were working fine for the last couple of weeks. And I was testing Linux deployments, Windows deployments, TypeScript, JavaScript. It was all good. And then Monday of this week, it just suddenly stopped working. And it took me until about 30 minutes before this demo. I think I figured out what the problem was, and it's fixed. So this is going to be one of those fun demos where I'm really hoping it works when I get to the end of these steps. I'm basically going to walk through this article and talk about what you need to do. And just to be clear, the focus of this article is really on what you need to do to the Office add-in to deploy it. It's not so much about how do you deploy in Azure, because there's tons of resources out there in Azure. And there's tons of ways to deploy. There's continuous integration, either through Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions. You can set up deployment slots for staging and live. So this article is really about what's just a simple path to deploy it, so you can understand like what parts of your Office add-in need to be adjusted if you're going to an Azure App Service. And the first thing to point out here is that we do have an existing article on how to deploy a static HTML to a storage account on Azure. This works for, I believe, all of the Office templates. It doesn't work with SSO. And the reason for that is because SSO requires you to run server-side code. So for that, you have to use an Azure App Service, and that's why this is a little different. So let's go ahead and through this. Now, as a prerequisite, this is based on the Office template. So we'll get started with running Office. And we're going to build just a simple little SSO add-in. And the thing you want to be sure of first is that it's working on localhost before you deploy it, because you don't want to deal with both deployment and trying to debug stuff at the same time. So we'll get that going. And then once this is created, I'll walk you through how you create the service app itself. All right, so in my Office, I'm going to pick the SSO option. We can just use JavaScript, that's fine. Let's give it a name. We'll run it on Excel. So I'll call David CH Contoso SSO test. Then it'll go run its npm install all the pieces. One thing I'll mention while it's doing that is the latter half of this article is about how you modify the project itself. And some of these changes, I want to be looking at putting a PR to the template itself, because I think we can simplify some of this. And then hopefully that'll remove some of these steps, so you don't have to do quite so much to update your project and deploy it. I forgot that for some reason when Teams is running, I think it takes a fair amount of CPU power, because I notice other stuff runs a little slower. And speaking of npm install, while this is running, there's kind of an interesting decision you have to make. Like when you deploy, do you want to run npm install in the Azure App Service, or do you want to just upload the node modules folder from localhost? I'm not sure if anyone has a preference on that. I do know that if you go and set up continuous integration in various paths, there are mechanisms to deal with that. In this article, I just run the npm install on the server, but you can always change that. So let's open up our project. The next thing we're going to need to do is configure it to use SSO. I guess it's hiding over here. There we go. So let's open up the terminal. Run our configure SSO. This is going to create an app registration. for SSO. And you can choose if you want to put that app registration on the tenant you're using for deployment, or if you want to put it into the tenant where it's getting consumed, where like I might be running Excel. Now what it should be doing is popping up a window. Oh, here we go. I was going to say, needs to authenticate. So I'm going to deploy it to my tenant where I'm going to use it. So I'll log into that account. Okay. Signed in. So now it should be off and running. It's going to be updating the project. And so actually, while it's doing this, we can jump ahead. You're going to need this Azure Extension installed into Visual Studio Code. And then you can connect your tenant. I have a Visual Studio MSDN subscription. And I'm going to connect, and then you have app services up there, and I already have a few because I've been testing. So what I'm going to do is create a new app service, and these are the steps over here, by the way. You can do, there's steps if you want to deploy to Windows, steps if you want to deploy to Linux. I'm going to use Windows because for some reason I found that's a little faster, at least for my scenario. So I'm going to select, I'm going to right click on app services, say create new web app advanced, and then give it a name. Call this one web, just so I can remember this is the web server part of it. You need to pick a resource. You can create a new one if you don't have one. I've got one set up here. Right now, the SSO template is using Node 16, so don't go to Node 18 just yet. It lags behind, I don't know, maybe a month or two, and then there's testing down into updates. So I'm going to pick 16. I'm going to pick Windows as my OS. And then I'm going to pick my region. I'm on the West US, so we'll do that. And then pick one of your service plans. I'm going to go ahead and use this paid service plan I have. You can also use like a free one if you want, or you can create one here. Paid one tends to be a little more performant. All right, so it's off creating the web app. Let's go back to here. Okay, we got our project configured. So the next step is to start configuring our project, I believe. So we're going to want to update the manifest. So if you open up your manifest and take a look, like this is, right, everything in here is going to be localhost. And we need to change that to our actual server URL. So let's go get that while still creating it. I'll give it a sec just to finish that. But the easy way to update that, you can set up a deployment option in the Webpack config that comes with this template. It will look for localhost and replace it for you. But you do need to change it a little bit. You just want the domain. Then I'll go put the website URL here. Should be done by now. Yep, there it is. So I'm going to open it, right click on it and open it in the portal. And this account is my web server account. So now I'm looking at my web app. This is the app service, which I try to keep this distinct. It's not the app registration because that's more about SSO. This is about running the website. So I'm going to copy this URL to the website, and I'm going to go back and put that in here. You want to make sure you update this anywhere it shows up in your project. So like it's also in, if I go down to my source helpers, there's this fallback auth dialog, JS, and there's a spot here where it's using that name. And I didn't mean to double copy that. There we go. Okay, so let's make sure we didn't miss anything. So that should take care of our manifest. And we also need to take care of our package JSON. There's a couple of changes we need to make. There are some helper commands I put in here that you can run. The command line to update the start. And you also want to delete this pre-start script because when you deploy to Azure, it'll run that pre-start and it's, well, actually, let me show you why. I should point this out. If you go to the package JSON, This start is trying to run this Office add-in debugging package, and that's basically attempts to launch Excel, which isn't going to work on your server. So instead, this has to become node middle tier.js. So you just start the node server. And then the other thing is you want to get rid of this pre-start because it'll try to run a build, and we're going to have the build already done. So we don't need to run a build. So we take that out. That's what those two commands do. And then let's make sure we save these changes. We need one more update to Webpack, which is we want to make sure we copy our package JSON over to our distribution so that when we deploy, it'll run the npm install on the server side. So I'm going to put that in down here near the bottom, this copy Webpack plugin part. And we already updated the fallback auth. Need to update our env, so it's production. So I'm going to go to this .env file, switch this to production. Save that. And we're going to update our app.js. Now, the reason we're going to update that is because it is using a package that's not going to work. Let's see, this is middle tier app.js. It will want to use this Office add-in dev certs to create an SSL self-signed certificate, but you don't want to do that on the server side or on Azure. You'll have one already. And this will fail if it tries to run because it tries to look for a Windows, I forget what it's called. It's like a Windows storage for certificates or something. So to make it easy, I just copy, paste, and replace it. Now, this is where I found out the bug was. So I'm going to copy from this other project because I know this one works. And I will need to go update the article so it has this correct code. So I'm just going to copy this over and save. And I believe that's all we need to do on this. So I'm going to run the build. And that's going to create a distribution folder up here. Basically, it's running Webpack. It's going to copy all the files into a dist folder. And the dist folder is what I'm going to deploy up to my web server. Now, while that's going, open up another portal to Azure. Now, this is the tenant that's going to consume it. It has my app registration at the moment because I need to update this as well. So if I go to my app registrations and sort by date, because I have way too many of these, there's my Contoso SSO test. This is the one that the npm configure command ran, and it created this for me. But if you look at like your redirect URIs, you'll see these still say localhost 3000. So these need to be updated as well. You might want to create multiple app registrations. Like when you're testing locally, you might want this one, and you could create a copy of this and then have another one that's using your server or a staging server or whatever. For simplicity, I'm just going to edit this one. So we just need to go get that URL. Copy that. Now this build's done, so let's get this going because this might take a moment. So I'm going to right-click my dist folder because I want to deploy it. I'm going to say deploy to web app. I'm going to pick the one that we just created, Contoso test SSO web. Say, yep, go ahead and deploy it because it's going to overwrite what's up there. And I'm going to say, yeah, we can default to that in the future. So if I keep deploying, if I make updates to this dist folder, I can keep uploading it. So here we can see it's doing its deployment. So it's packaging everything up and setting up to the server, and then it'll start node for us. While it's doing that, I was going to go back to the app registration. Just over here, so we can make sure we update this. Save it. Now, you don't need to update this task pane one. I'm not sure why the template creates it. I think it's that used to be the name or something. So I mean, you can change it if you want. I just leave it alone. And then if you go down to expose an API, you have this application ID URI. So this also needs to be updated with that domain so that your SSO is going to work correctly. All right, so that should take care of that. Now let's go back and check the Contoso site. So we're still deploying. It says successful, but I wait till this thing stops running. But once it is running, we should be able to open up this website and just kind of test it. Like or task pane.html. Okay, we're getting info back, so that's a good sign. Let's see, get this part to work. So I'm going to go in Excel, create a new workbook. I'm going to go ahead and just sideload this. So I'm going to go just upload the manifest from locally. And let's see here. Let's go to the demo folder. I need SSO test. But I'm not going to use this manifest. That's the localhost one. In the dist folder is the one that got built that's switched out with the correct domains. So I'm going to open that one, upload it, show task pane, Katoso SSO test. Yep. Look it, see if it works. Oh, no, I got an error. Well, this is a problem I was having earlier. I thought maybe that would work because it was. This one's working, which I did earlier. This test 9. So I'm going to have to go back and look at some code difference between these. This is the thing I was worried about. So next steps, I will update the article so that for sure it works correctly. I'll figure out why this is failing in some cases and hopefully get that published by the end of this week. And then after that, I'll be following up with the folks on the template to submit a PR and see if we can make fewer steps for deployment. So that is it. So Preethika, turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, David. That was an awesome demo.